Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us today. And we'll go ahead to get started for our webinar today about designing solar energy programs for low-income consumers and communities. We have three expert presenters. Let's go to the next slide, please. And they include Jenny Heater, a senior energy analyst at the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. Jenny currently leads work on community solar, including participating in the National Community Solar Partnership, which she will talk to us about today. She's been working at the National Renewable Energy Lab for more than 10 years, focusing on researching state and local renewable energy policies, corporate purchases of renewable energy, and community solar deployment and cost. Before coming to NREL, she was an analyst with the Indiana Office of Utility Consumer Counsel, focusing on energy efficiency and green power programs. And one of Jenny's special COVID activities now is being a first grade teacher at home. And we want to welcome Jenny to the call today. Also, Galen Barbos, research scientist in the Electricity Markets and Policy Department at Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. He conducts research and analysis on issues in the electric utility industry related to renewable energy, energy efficiency, and electric system planning. He leads Berkeley's annual Tracking the Sun report series about solar energy progress in the United States and the annual Renewable Portfolio Standards Status Report. And he's published more than 100 different publications while he's been working for Lawrence Berkeley Lab. One of Galen's special COVID activities include working on Legos, finger painting, and nap time enforcement. Ted Tribu is joining us, also director of the DC Sustainable Energy Utility. And he serves as director of the District of Columbia Sustainable Energy Utility, was previously vice president for the District of Columbia Affairs at Pepco, the utility company, worked for the Greater Washington Board of Trade as a staff director for critical issues, and for the District of Columbia and Maryland. He also served as chief of staff to the former DC City Council chairman, Linda Krapp. Mr. Tribu is a fourth generation Washingtonian, and like his mother and his grandmother, he attended District of Columbia Public Schools. He received a degree in economics from Dartmouth College and a law degree from Harvard University School of Law. And during his COVID hiatus, Ted has been completing long overdue home renovation projects and is planning a trip that hopefully will take place in about 10 months from now. I'm Tom Stanton, principal researcher for energy and environment at the National Regulatory Research Institute. I've been a lifelong resident of Michigan, formerly worked for the Michigan State Energy Office and Michigan Public Service Commission staff. And my special COVID activities include working on my family genealogy research and sorting through a century of family photographs. Thank you all for joining us today and welcome to the webinar. Next slide, please. I'm going to give you a very brief introduction. This slide just gives the whole rundown on today's webinar so that people watching the recording later will be able to see that. Let's go to the next, please. And here's a couple housekeeping messages for you. It shows you where to enter questions. I see we've put this together for our previous system using GoToWebinar. Today we're using Zoom Meeting, and you'll find the Q&A tab in the middle of your menu at the bottom of your screen. So enter questions at any time during the session, please. Don't hold them until the end. Just go ahead and when you think of them, enter questions. After each presenter, we'll try to handle any clarifying questions, and then we'll hold the general questions and discussion topics until everyone has finished. Let's go to the next, please. I'm going to give you a little introduction to the topic based on research that I've just recently completed. Go to the next, please. A new insights publication from NRRI is coming out today and will be posted on our website later today, or you certainly will be able to find it by tomorrow. Here's a brief quotation from the introduction to this paper where I've looked at low-income programs around the country that provide solar energy for customers and for communities, and try to take a look to figure out what are the most important aspects of those programs that are making them successful. Let's go to the next, please. This is a map that comes from my presentation showing which states are managing which kinds of programs or how many programs for different target audiences. The target audiences are listed at the left, and the map shows by color the number of programs each state is managing. You'll notice that community shared solar is an important part of the programming in 17 states. 11 states are working on programs that provide solar energy for single family homes, 10 states for multifamily homes. Several states provide solar energy for the businesses or non-government organizations or government agencies that are providing services to low-income clientele. And then there are 4 states that are working with, especially with historically disadvantaged communities or environmental justice communities. Next, please. These are the 6 factors that the research and evaluation shows are most important to the success of these programs in all different places around the country. And later today, we'll be hearing from Ted Tribu about the Washington, D.C. program, which is one of the most successful in the country. The first and second are really important to make certain that as programs get started, the audience has been very clearly identified who will be the target for the program support, and how will the program managers and program delivery people communicate with those audiences. The other factors seem perhaps simplistic or certainly overly understandable, but these are the kinds of things that need to be built into the programs in order for them to prove successful. Let's go to the next, please. Here I'm showing you a brief excerpt from a table that is at the appendix to this paper. I've listed in the appendix the program activities for 18 different jurisdictions. The sources for case study information are listed on the left here in this slide, and that'll show you an example of what the different reports are going to look like for each state, along with hot links where you can go to learn more about who has done what in each of those states. And I just included these 3 because they're kind of prominent states that have already gotten quite a bit of success from their programs. Next, please. And here are the 3 major policy mechanisms that are being used around the country. What's called inclusive financing, and some of the aspects of that mean trying to make it so that people can participate without having to have upfront cash to pay to get started in the programming, very minimal credit checks or verifications, and monthly cost savings greater than any monthly repayments. And you'll see more information about these kinds of different financing options in the coming presentations. Subsidies or incentives are very often provided, and they're funded by taxpayers or ratepayers. And then many states in their programming has what are called set-asides or carve-outs that require either the utilities or solar project developers to include some number of low-income customers or low-income projects or services to low-income communities. Next, please. Here's a bit of the conclusion from my report, a couple quotations that you can look at on your own. And I'm very excited now to continue today's discussion. We'll hear from Jenny Heater, and then Galen Barbos, and then Ted Tribu. Again, keep your questions coming as you have them, and we'll have a discussion and Q&A following the presentations. Next, please. Thank you. Jenny, do you want to take it away?
Yep, thanks Tom for having me today. I'm going to be talking about community solar and the low income provisions that are taking place across the country for those programs. Next slide. And one more actually. But before I delve into some of our research, I wanted to just highlight a partnership program that is offered by the Department of Energy. Next slide. The National Community Solar Partnership is funded by the Department of Energy and done in collaboration with NREL as well as Lawrence Berkeley National Lab. It's really designed with 3 pieces in mind: being able to network with peers, collaborate with folks in a similar sector to you, and access free technical assistance. So this program is a multi-year program that's focused on community solar deployment across the country, and just wanted to highlight it here for folks. If you're not engaged, I encourage you to take a look. Next slide. We do have partners from across the country and are actively seeking additional partners. The partnership is free to join. We do have concentrations of folks in some states, but definitely are missing some states there. So if you are in one of those states that does not have a partner or participation, feel free to reach out to me if you have questions about the partnership. Next slide. One of the unique things that the partnership is doing is providing this networking platform. So it's on a mobilized platform where folks can join. It's kind of like a social network for community solar. You can create a profile. You can search for other members. So if you have a question like, for a specific person that works in a different state, you can message them directly, or you can create a post for everyone. So we're up to about 400 members, and on the right there, you can see some of the questions that people have asked, in particular stuff around a database of energy equity projects and programs, or LMI adoption rates for community solar. So it's a great way to learn from your peers and connect with folks who might, you may not have their contact information, or you're not going to conferences to meet new people. Next slide. So this is the link to join the partnership. I'll also throw that in the chat once I'm done presenting here. It's free, it's a quick registration, so we hope you can join us. Next slide. So as part of NREL's work on community solar, we do track low and moderate income participation in community solar and some of the policies that are being implemented across the country. Next slide. We know this is an area of interest because in the community solar market, there have been subscription structures that are challenging for LMI customers. So NREL does track subscription structures for all community solar projects across the country, and a large chunk of those still involve an upfront payment. So this is where a subscriber is putting down, thousands of dollars per kilowatt for their subscription. And we know that's the hardest structure for LMI consumers. On the flip side, on the left-hand side of this, you'll see structures that are easier for LMI consumers. One that we're seeing a lot of in some emerging states is a discounted rate approach. So that's where customers receive 10%, could be 20%, 30% savings on their bill because of their subscription. Next slide. What we do see in terms of trends for subscription as well is a monthly payment, which is a little bit easier for an LMI customer than an upfront payment, but still not as advantageous as this fixed discount or discounted rate approach. So I won't go through all the numbers here, but just to say that we do track these subscription models and know that low-income customers and moderate-income customers need different solutions than the general rate base. Next slide. So Tom featured some of this data when looking overall at solar low-income programs and policies. This map focuses just on those provisions for community solar. So we have 12 states that have a carve out for their community solar program for LMI. This is usually something like 20% of the portfolio has to be subscribed by low-income customers. Sometimes it's on a project basis, sometimes it's on a portfolio basis. And we also have 8 states that provide some type of incentive. So this might be in a higher compensation rate or a credit rate for low-income customers. It could be structured using the state's SREC framework or some other structure. And then a lot of states also have use different approaches, use multiple approaches, or change their approach over time. Next slide. So one thing we have started to track is how much community solar is actually serving low-income customers. So this is changing over time, but we wanted to get a lay of the land and look at how much installed capacity is there right now. So we're at a little bit over 30 megawatts of community solar that is serving a low-income customer. So this takes into account, for example, if you have a 2 megawatt project and only half of it is serving LMI customers, we would only count that 1 megawatt here. There is quite a bit in the pipeline as well. Over 160 megawatts of low-income community solar are planned. Based on current subscription amounts, it's about 40,000 LMI households that would benefit from those 167 megawatts. I won't run through the ways that this is being done in detail, but just to say we do track this and these evolutions over time. Next slide. So one of the most common questions that we hear from states or utilities when they're trying to figure out a low-income community solar subscription is how do we make the economics work? So NREL did write a paper on this a couple years ago that delves into a lot more detail, but the high level is there are different ways to pull in different funding mechanisms that are going to look different depending on your state context. So first one is just state funding. So if there are existing state programs that could be applied, this could be an energy specific program, it could be an environmental program. An example of this is in Colorado. The energy office there used some state funding to do some grant funding for LMI dedicated community solar projects. Second piece is just savings from the solar project. So we've seen utilities procure solar resources that are cheaper than their current electricity, what they pay for other electricity sources, and they've found ways to pass along those cost savings to LMI customers. Third option is looking at utility low-income bill subsidies. So for utilities that are gathering funds from all their ratepayers to pay bills for LMI customers, instead of using that pot of money just to pay bills, use those funds to support an LMI community solar subscription. The last example is one that we hear talked about quite a bit, but it's not actually being implemented yet, but I wanted to highlight it as an example that could be used in the future, which is looking at federal LIHEAP dollars. So LIHEAP dollars could be used to pay for a community solar subscription, similar to the example above. There are some challenges with figuring out how that could be done and the approvals and process for doing that, but just wanted to throw that in the mix here. Next slide. And moving on to the next one actually. So I just wanted to conclude with one specific analysis that we did for states that were looking at low-income community solar and trying to figure out the impacts of having a share of low-income participation and what that would do for other participants, as well as just the general structure of community solar project. So this work was done for actually 5 states and DC. We looked at 3 scenarios for a community solar project. We looked at 20% LMI participation with an anchor tenant, 20% LMI participation with no anchor tenant, and then we also looked at what would the bill credit level need to be for a subscriber to have a positive net present value. We do have an in-depth slide deck on this with a lot of detail about our assumptions that I won't go into here. Next slide. So these are our scenarios that we examined. We looked at different levels of LMI and non-LMI customers, and then different levels of an anchor tenant. Next slide. So these are the credit rates that we use for each of these projects. So credit rates differ in different states. For states that had an established credit rate, we pulled in that information. For states like New Mexico and Oregon that did not at the time have credit rates established, we assumed the utilities retail rate for those customers. In states where there was an SREC value, a solar renewable energy certificate value, we pulled in that dollar amount and assigned that to a specific lifetime for compensation. Next slide. So this is results for just one state, Connecticut, and I realize this is a lot of information on one slide. But basically you can see in scenario one, I'll just walk through some of these. So the assumption we have in scenario one, that first row, is that we're going to have a 40% anchor tenant, and we are going to have that bill credit rate of 18 cents, translates into a monthly lease panel price. And then we calculate essentially the value of the electricity and then the subscriber's net present value. Then in the shaded gray parts, we look at how does that look for low and moderate income customers versus non-low and moderate income customers. And essentially we see that there are differences between those customer types because we are forcing the model to achieve savings for LMI customers. If you look at the bottom line there, we see that without an anchor tenant subscriber, there are substantial impacts. So that was one of our findings, that just having an anchor tenant can reduce the subscription price for others as well. Next slide. So we ran these models for the 5 states and DC, and some of our key conclusions are here. I know I'm running towards the end of my time, so I will just say, yeah, a couple of things. Having an anchor tenant can really reduce prices. That is really driven by the fact that there's less subscription acquisition costs associated with the project if an anchor tenant is taking a large chunk of the project. We also found that providing a discounted LMI subscription price has really only a small impact on those non-LMI subscribers. So for our scenarios, if we gave LMI customers a 10% discount on their lease panel price, that resulted in a 2.5% increase for non-LMI customers. Last point here is that we did see when we tried to optimize the bill credit rate needed to achieve a positive NPV for customers, we had to increase that really a wide variety, ranged from 7% to 103% across the states examined. So very state specific here. And we are hoping that other states can use this tool. We use the Elevate Energy tool to model the subscription structures and then just added in our own Excel backend calculations for the LMI piece. Next slide. Finally, just wanted to share our other resources. So the first piece there is our Sharing the Sun project, which is just data on community solar projects across the country. We have a list Excel sheet of community solar projects with details on those project sizes. And then our other reports are at the NREL site listed here, or just Google NREL Community Solar to find it. And that's all I've got. Thanks very much.
Okay, thank you so much, Jenny. And everyone, I think you'll get the idea that this is a work in progress, and we're by no means finished understanding all the details about what can make these programs work. Sherry Lichtenberg from NRRI is monitoring the questions. Do we have any clarification questions that we want to ask now, Sherry?
Actually, we do, Tom, so let me ask a couple of them. Jenny, is there a timeline for these planned LMI projects?
Yes, so when we gather data on those planned projects, for most states, there is some sort of like timeline you have to be developed in the next 18 months or 24 months. Don't think we have that data compiled anywhere, but if that person wants to shoot me a note, I can provide as much as we have offhand.
And one more question that before we go forward, how do you define an anchor tenant, and what does a good situation with one look like?
Yeah, so for the purposes of that last analysis, we defined an anchor tenant as taking 40% of the offtake of a community solar project. Anchor is kind of a loose term, but it's essentially, you know, taking enough of the array that it helps move the project financing forward. So often these look like local governments actually, or universities that have a known load into the future and a commitment towards renewable energy or sustainability. But anchor tenants can be any type of commercial or larger customer that is taking a good share of a project.
That's it. There are some more questions that we can address later. So Tom, and back to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Our next presenter is Galen Barbos from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. And Galen told us he's having a little bit of trouble with his internet connection, so he was going to keep his camera turned off while he does his presentation. Let's turn it over to Galen, and please go to the next slide. Thank you, Galen.
Thanks, Tom. And yeah, hopefully my internet connection cooperates throughout the slide deck here. I did get booted off twice during Jenny's presentation, so I'm crossing my fingers that doesn't happen here. So I'm going to talk about a variety of projects, some current and kind of ongoing research activities at Berkeley Lab, all of which revolves in some way around sort of understanding income and demographic trends among solar adopters. I would say, with maybe one exception, all of the work that I'll be describing is really focused on single family residential rooftop PV. So in contrast to the work that Jenny was just describing, which was focused on community solar, a lot of our work, again, with maybe one exception, has been focused primarily on residential rooftop and really specifically single family as opposed to multi-family projects. The other little bit of introductory context is I wanted to note the variety of folks whose names are listed on the title slide here. Myself, Sydney Forrester, Eric O'Shaughnessy, Naeem Darguth, and Ben Paulos. This is kind of the collection of folks at Berkeley Lab who are all doing work in this space, and in fact, many of the projects that I'll be describing are being led by one or another of these folks. And so I'm going to be hopefully doing justice to their work. But certainly if there are questions that come up that I can't answer, folks should feel free to reach out to anybody on the list here. So next slide, please. So the body of work that I'll be talking about is more or less captured on the list of projects on the slide here. The first I'll discuss a little bit our ongoing tracking activity that's really focused on kind of just describing and characterizing income and other demographic attributes of residential solar adopters. That's kind of a foundational activity of ours. Related to this sort of annual tracking work is an online data visualization tool that we've developed and have sort of released in conjunction with the tracking reports. And that tool, it more or less is based on the same data that we summarize in the reports, but just provides users with some additional flexibility and options for cutting the data and kind of drilling down into it in different ways. So I'll talk a little bit about that tool. We have a report that is currently in draft form, an LMI solar meta evaluation. This is kind of the one project within the list here that is more expansive than just focusing on residential rooftop solar. And that project really, as the name suggests, is aimed at looking at how LMI solar programs generally are evaluated, kind of evaluating the evaluations. And that work is still in draft form, but I'll present some preliminary findings from that as well. Number 4 is a paper that was recently published in the journal Nature Energy, called The Impact of Policies and Business Models on Income Equity and Rooftop Solar Adoption. And that paper really aimed at evaluating the effects of a few specific policy and business model interventions on kind of the income of residential solar adopters, and trying to understand which of these interventions may have been more successful in increasing adoption among LMI households. So that's work that's been completed. Number 5 here is the technical assistance that we provide that really tries to leverage a lot of the data and tools represented in the items above. And then last, I'll talk a little bit about our plans for the coming year. Much of that is just sort of when we expect various products to be released, but there's also some new work underway that I'll also mention on that slide there. And then last but not least, I wanted to highlight the website at the bottom of the screen here, solardemographics.lbl.gov. That's kind of the clearinghouse website that we've set up that provides a portal to all of our work in this area. So the tracking reports, the data visualization tool, any sort of more in-depth analyses that we might conduct along the lines of number 3 and 4. There's also a link on that page where entities can request technical assistance. So all of the material that I'll be talking about here today can all be accessed through this website at the bottom, solardemographics.lbl.gov. Next slide, please. So I'll talk first a little bit about our ongoing tracking work. So some of you may be familiar with our Tracking the Sun report. This is a project that we've been doing for, gosh, I don't know, maybe 12 or 13 or 14 years, I'm not sure. And that project is not focused at all on demographics or income issues. It's focused instead on kind of distributed PV costs and kind of project design trends. But through that work, we've assembled this very large data set of residential solar adopters, including street addresses. We also have street addresses that we've obtained through a variety of different permitting data sets. And we take that information and marry it with some household level income and demographic data that we've purchased from Experian, and use that information really just to track and describe how the income attributes of residential solar adopters have evolved over time, how they differ across geographies, really just to sort of illustrate some of the large trends that we see in the market. And some of those large trends are itemized here. First and foremost, perhaps, is that PV adopters do span all income ranges. And you can see that a little bit in the figure on the top. If you look at the darkest blue bars, you can see representation among all of the different income categories. At the same time, when you compare that distribution to the distribution of all US households, you can see that PV adopters are indeed skewed towards higher incomes. That's not a surprise. I think that's really the assumption that we all are operating under, but this work helps to kind of quantify that more precisely. You can also see that that skew is somewhat less pronounced when comparing just to owner-occupied households. And indeed, that's one of the main rationales for interest in community solar, to kind of open up access to renters. You can also see in the figure on the bottom that the skew has declined over time. In other words, solar adoption is slowly, but nonetheless fairly consistently migrating towards lower and more moderate income households over time. And you can see that as the percentage of solar adopters each year within those kind of lower two income groups has slowly marched up over time. And then last, we don't show it on the slide here, but that skew that you see does vary quite a bit from state to state, and even at kind of smaller geographic scales. And indeed, a lot of the more analytical work that we've done is aimed at really trying to understand and explore some of that variation and the role that different policies and business models might be playing in that. So we've thus far issued one edition of this tracking report. The second edition is underway. We hope to release it in the early part of 2021. And one unique feature of the next edition of this work is that we do plan on expanding the scope beyond just income levels, but also looking at other demographic attributes like education, whether the households are located in rural or urban areas, household age and composition, some of the other items listed here. So that is up and coming. Next slide. So I mentioned our online solar demographics tool, which is really kind of a companion to that annual tracking report. Shown here is a screenshot from that tool. It's, as I mentioned, really based on the same data as in the tracking report, but is intended just to allow users to cut the data in different ways and drill down into smaller geographies down to the county level. You can see at the top here a variety of different controls and toggles. One of the things that the users can do is kind of look at trends based on different kinds of income metrics. So within the LMI solar community, different programs might use different types of eligibility thresholds to define participation eligibility for their program. So it might be based on a percentage of area median income, it might be based on a percentage of the federal poverty level, might be based on just absolute income levels. And so the tool here allows users to toggle between some set of different metrics in order to pick the one that might be most tailored to their interests or their program. And then finally, through this tool, users can download not the raw data. Unfortunately, that is obtained under a data license agreement, but download fairly detailed statistical summaries for whatever region of interest, along with maps and figures. Next slide. So one of the most recent kind of deeper analytical pieces that we've done was a paper that is focused on analyzing the role of different policies and business models in driving LMI adoption. This is work that Eric O'Shaughnessy within our team has led, and is a paper that was published a couple months ago, maybe in the journal Nature Energy. And so through this paper, we explored 5 different policies and business models. 3 of them are named specifically on this slide here, and those are LMI targeted incentives, so programs that provide kind of elevated rebates to LMI households, leasing, or third-party ownership more generally, and then finally PACE, or property assessed clean energy financing. Those were the 3 interventions that we found to be consistently associated with higher levels of adoption among LMI households. And you can see that in the figure shown here, where we just simply show the average income of solar adopters using each of those 3 different interventions and compare that to all adopters. So you can see that while all PV adopters had an average income of 127,000, that number was 106,000 for PACE recipients, and lessees or third-party ownership adopters, and was not surprisingly much lower than that, 67K for participants in LMI incentive programs. In addition to just kind of understanding the income characteristics of adopters within each of these groups, the analysis did also kind of try to estimate the effects of these interventions on LMI adoption rate, and found that all 3 were in fact associated with higher levels of solar adoption by LMI households. And that manifested in really in two distinct ways. One is through what we call a deepening of markets. So within existing and established PV markets, these interventions tended to drive adoption into progressively lower and lower income households over time. But secondly, and perhaps more importantly, these effects also manifest through a broadening of markets. In other words, really kind of driving adoption into lower income markets that previously saw relatively low levels of adoption. And that second dynamic, the broadening, is particularly important from kind of a market transformation perspective, in that it can lead to various spillover effects that allow the programs to sort of expand their impact beyond simply the direct participants. And those spillovers, I think that probably the one that folks might be most familiar with is just this concept of peer effects, where an individual, if they see, a neighbor or somebody within their community install a PV system, it just has this effect of kind of putting it on the person's psychological radar and prompting consideration of PV, where otherwise that might not have happened. So that's some work that, as I mentioned, has been published and is really kind of has teed up a variety of other questions that we are continuing to explore. Next slide. So I mentioned this LMI solar meta evaluation that is currently in draft form. And this is some work that Ben Paulos has been leading, and really is focused on looking at how LMI programs are evaluated and kind of characterizing current practices and best practices. We looked at program evaluations from about 40 different programs. Those evaluations really kind of ran the gamut in terms of their scope and level of rigor. The graphic at the bottom kind of tries to illustrate the range in different program evaluation types that you can see, from kind of simple progress tracking evaluations to much more in-depth third-party evaluations looking at market impacts and market transformation. So the report has maybe a dozen sort of high-level findings. I'll just highlight 3 here. First, we see that LMI solar, it faces the same basic challenges as any low-income energy program, where if the beneficiary can't share the costs or has limited ability to cost share, obviously the program then has to bear most, if not all, of the measure costs, which then makes the program less cost effective, at least from a kind of a program administrator cost benefit perspective. And so really, most of the LMI solar programs out there are experimental and are kind of looking at how best they can solve the leverage problem that arises due to the high sort of proportion of measure costs that the programs have to carry. And so evaluation has become really important within this sphere, just in terms of assessing which of these experimental approaches are working and are maybe doing a better job at addressing this leverage issue. Secondly, the program goals dictate or should dictate the evaluation. And this is just sort of a basic precept of program design. But not all programs out there were necessarily set up with clear or measurable goals. Some of the programs might have kind of general goals like providing benefits to disadvantaged communities, but may not really say what those benefits are. And so it can make it then challenging to evaluate those programs. And then lastly, since most LMI solar programs are generally small in terms of the overall program budget, their evaluation budgets are of course correspondingly small. And so, not every program out there can hire a, top tier consulting firm to run, a really premium evaluation. Program administrators are having to be creative and find some low cost ways to evaluate. And one important kind of strategy is to integrate data collection into just the normal program operations and find ways to maybe supplement that with public data sources. And as part of this LMI meta evaluation, we actually kind of tried to demonstrate how that could be done, and looked at 3 different low-income solar incentive programs in Connecticut, California, and New York, and really just tried to show how using the data that I've been talking about in the previous slides, one could estimate the program effects. And based on the analysis that we ran, we found that those 3 programs had an effect of essentially increasing adoption by 1 to 2 LMI households per 1,000 within the respective state. So that was the effects that we found. Next slide. So last here, I'll just mention really quickly the technical assistance that we offer. And this technical assistance, or institutional support, as we sometimes call it, is primarily targeted to organizations that are working within the LMI solar space, either program administrators or other kind of market actors who are engaged in that market. Most of the work that we've done really seeks to leverage the data, resources, and tools that we've developed through our ongoing tracking work. We offer this assistance on a rolling basis, at least for relatively small scale requests, as well as through periodic calls. And the Clean Energy States Alliance has been really helpful in kind of helping us to issue these calls for applications and connect us with organizations out there that are active in this space and could potentially benefit from some of the data and tools that we have at our disposal. Again, as I mentioned earlier, through our solardemographics.lbl.gov website, folks can access a request form where you can submit requests for technical assistance. Over the past year, we've provided assistance to maybe a dozen or so entities. Most of those have been pretty small scale requests, though we have had a few more significant ones. As one example, we provided some support to the Washington, D.C.'s Department of Energy and Environment. And that support really involved taking the data that we summarize within our tracking report, but breaking it out in sort of some customized ways, both geographically. So rather than just looking at things based on county, for this particular engagement, we broke out the data based on ward and single member district. So these are kind of even smaller scale geographical units, and looked at adoption, not just in terms of kind of the standard metrics that we tend to use, percent of AMI, for example, but also based on the percent of median income in the district, and in terms of the specific income levels that are used to define eligibility for DC Solar for All programs. So this is, I think, just sort of illustrative of the type of TA that we're looking to provide, where we're kind of leveraging the data that we have, but doing something different with it that kind of meets the specific needs of the requester. So next slide, which is really kind of the last just wrap up slide, I thought I'd give a quick summary of what we're planning for the coming year. So the next tracking report, as I mentioned, we're hoping to release in early 2021. And in conjunction with that, some updates to our data visualization tool. We'll also be issuing another call for technical assistance requests, either in conjunction with the report or maybe kind of immediately thereafter. This LMI solar meta evaluation that I talked about, it's currently under review, but we're hoping to release that early in the new year as well. And then the last thing, something that I haven't mentioned at all, but is kind of a continuation of our general interest in analyzing income trends among solar adopters, is some work that Eric's been leading and that involves working with quote data that we obtained from Energy Sage. So some of you may be familiar with Energy Sage. It's a platform, a web platform that allows individuals to request quotes for rooftop solar, and then installers then submit quotes through that platform. And so we've got a bunch of data on quotes that have been provided, and Eric's been doing some really interesting stuff really to kind of try to understand how income segregation, kind of the geographical segregation by income within the population, then kind of tends to reinforce and perpetuate income disparities among PV adopters. And then based on that, kind of thinking about what are the specific strategies that might be employed to overcome that sort of structural issue. So that's some work that is pretty early on, but we'll be releasing that at some point in the next year as well. So last and final slide, just want to point you all again towards our kind of portal website. Next slide, please. solardemographics.lbl.gov. Through that website, you can find all of the things that I've talked about, at least everything that's been published so far. So with that, thanks, and we might have some clarifying questions, perhaps.
Thank you, Galen. Sherry, do you see any clarifying questions?
The only question I see, Galen, that seems to be clarifying is, where does Experian get the address-specific household income and all the rest of the demographic data?
Yeah, no, that's a good question. So I should clarify that the household level income data they provide are household level income estimates. So they have, this vast database, I think it's called Consumer View, that has a lot of household level data that's actual data from those households that they collect through through a whole variety of different sort of sources. I can't really speak to it authoritatively, but the income information is modeled. So they have, this complex income estimation model that has been, trained on all of this household level data. Obviously, Experian, we're dealing with sort of the commercial side of the house, but then they also have the side of the house that is the Consumer Credit Rating Bureau. And so I'm not certain, but I imagine that through that part of the enterprise, they may have access to a lot of data. That's not what they provide to us, but that may be what they then use to kind of train their model.
Okay.
I think that's it for the clarifying questions. And
thank you. Let's go to the next slide. And we've heard now from the two national labs, and we really appreciate all that work that Department of Energy is funding to help us all learn more about how to make these programs most successful. Now we're going to hear from Ted Tribu, whose organization is actually implementing one of the programs, and they've just been doing exceptional work. So let's hear what Ted has to say about implementing particular kinds of programs in the Washington, D.C. area. Thank you for joining us, Ted.
Tom, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. And I want to thank you for the kind introduction when you started the meeting earlier today. I do want to say you gave me a bit of an upgrade when you were listing my academic credentials. You said that I graduated from Harvard University School of Law. I wish. I graduated from Howard University School of Law, but here in the District of Columbia. But I do want to give a shout out to fellow Bison Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, as she will assume a very, very challenging new job on the 20th of January next year. And it's also a pleasure to be here to talk about the work that we have been doing through the Sustainable Energy Utility, which is the organization that I run. And I've been running here for a little over 9 years now. And the programs that we operate for both energy efficiency and renewable energy, the previous speakers have spoken of this program called Solar for All. That is one of the programs that we run here in the District of Columbia. And so in my comments this afternoon, I will talk about both single family solar and community solar, talk about some of the methodologies through which we pay for these systems, finance these systems, talk specifically about the relationship with customers, which I believe is critically important in the development and deployment of renewable energy systems in the income qualified community. We'll talk about some of the policies that are driving our work here in the city. And finally, I have a slide on the impact, and so we can show you a snippet of what we've been able to accomplish here in the District of Columbia. I think that the previous speakers were correct in their assessment that evaluation of these programs is a bit difficult, but we do track what we've done very, very carefully. And I would like to present some of the results of what we've been able to accomplish. I know it's interesting when you get to sessions like this where so many states are thinking about this and haven't done it yet. And when I wind the clock back about 8 to 9 years when we started doing this, I'll tell you about some of the things that really got us going in the installation of these. We started with single family, then moved to community solar systems about 2 years ago. And so you can go to the next slide and we can kind of kick it off. The sustainable energy utility, and I know that's a mouthful, is really a third-party implementer of energy efficiency and renewable programs, renewable energy programs here in the District of Columbia, your nation's capital. We were created by the Clean and Affordable Energy Act of 2008, which required the city to run a competitive solicitation to select a vendor who would actually design and implement these programs. Prior to 2008, electric energy efficiency programs were run by our electric company, Pepco. Gas energy efficiency programs were run by the gas company, Washington Gas. Any renewable energy programs that we had at the time were run by the city government itself, the Department of Energy and Environment. What the city did was pass this law which said we're going to put all of this under one house so that there's a one-stop shop for all of these efficiency and renewable energy programs. We were the successful bidder back in 2010 once the solicitation actually hit the street. And when I say we, the DC Sustainable Energy Utility is an operating division of a company, a 501c3 nonprofit called VEIC. Many of you may be familiar with the name Vermont Energy Investment Corporation. We go by VEIC now, but we have been running these programs here in the District of Columbia since 2011, and we started the solar programs in 2012. We are funded by a public benefit surcharge on all utility ratepayers' bills with the exception of low-income customers. So if you're a ratepayer here in the district, residential household, small business, large business, the federal government, the metro system, everyone pays this public benefit surcharge. And we have what's called a performance-based contract with the city. So in order to earn a margin on the work that we do, we have to hit certain goals for the city, and we're very, very proud of that. I'll show you those goals in just a second. And our programs are designed really to help everyone. Everyone in the city is a ratepayer, at least on the electric side. About 20% of our customers receive natural gas, and now we also have customers who are using oil, who are paying the public benefit surcharge as well, and so they're paying in and contributing to these funds. And so we provide energy efficiency and renewable energy services to all customer classes here in the District of Columbia. You can go to the next slide. So the goals that have been established, particularly around solar, are, in our view, extremely aggressive. Some might say, I would hate to say somewhat unattainable. I never like to look at a goal in that way, but the goal that was established through the legislation about 5 years ago that actually initiated the Solar for All program was to reduce the energy burden for low-income households, or 100,000 low-income households, by 50% on average by the year 2032. We define income qualified households as households who are earning 80% or less of area median income. And of course, that goes on a sliding scale depending upon how many people you have living in the home. And that sliding scale changes every year based upon the income in the city and in the region. But we are helping the city meet its renewable energy goals, and the money that we dedicate to these programs, and I'll be more specific about that, is all in the for the solar programs, for the renewable energy programs. All of the funding is dedicated to income qualified customers. When we started this work about 9 years ago, when we started to design the energy efficiency programs, our overall contract called for us to really do about 6 things here in the District of Columbia. One was to reduce energy, of course, for residential and commercial customers. 2 was to create jobs for DC residents. 3rd was we had a spending requirement to spend a certain amount of our funds with DC-based businesses. 4th, we had to do some renewable energy projects. And then 5th, we had to spend 30% of our funding in the low income space. And so we thought about all of those goals, and we were just sitting around the conference room one day and we said, what are we going to do for the solar goal? It was our 2nd year of work. We hadn't really done any solar work yet. And I said, look, whatever we do in the solar space, it has to contribute to all of our other goals as well. So when I get to the impact in a minute, you'll get to see how we've spent money and helped develop local businesses in their capacity to install solar, how we've trained DC residents for jobs in the solar industry, and how we've reduced the energy burden for our income qualified residents. And all of these things went into the thought process of designing this low income single family solar program. The additional thought that I think was very important, and that the presenter just before me showed a map of the District of Columbia, and I was really reflecting on it. Back in 2012, when we took a look at a map just like he was showing of the District of Columbia, we realized that there were about 1,500 solar systems that had been installed in the District of Columbia at that point. This is back about 8 years ago. And then we looked at where those systems were. And not surprisingly, on the western part of town, which is the wealthier part of the District of Columbia, there were about 1,500 systems. On the eastern part of town, which comprises about 40% of the city, and we have about 720,000 residents here, but there are only maybe 180,000 residential customers. So you had 1,500 solar systems on the wealthy side of town, but on the side of town where incomes were lower, where there was a greater incidence of poverty and unemployment, there were about 20 systems representing, as I said, probably over 350,000 residents. And so we said we would work, all of our solar systems initially would be installed on the eastern part of town, wards 5, 7, and 8, the political designations here in the city, to make sure that we could bring a lot of equity to the work that we were doing here in the District of Columbia. You can go to the next slide. Along with the base funding that we receive to do energy efficiency here, there is another source of funding called the Renewable Energy Development Fund. And that fund is derived from compliance payments that our energy suppliers are paying when they fail to meet their renewable energy portfolio standards. Those compliance payments on average give us about $10 million a year that we're able to dedicate to the programs that we're running here in the District of Columbia. We believe in about 2 or 3 years that source of funding will actually give us a lot more money than we're receiving today. But for the last 3 years, our average investment in renewable energy has been about $10 million a year directly from this source of funding. Additionally, as I think the first presenter showed, the value of our SRECs here is over $400. And that, of course, is blended into the financing mixture that allows us to put together the financing package for these solar systems. Third is, of course, the investment tax credit, which has been declining over the last couple of years, but we hope that that might go back up again. You never know with the new administration what might happen. But the investment tax credit, of course, is another piece of capitalization that we put into, what we call the capital stack that allows us to put the financing together to develop these systems. You can go to the next slide. Let's talk about our customers for a minute. A couple of minutes ago, I talked about, we said we were going to start to do our work on the eastern part of town. And so one of the things that we had to do was quickly go about identifying customers. Our organization was only 2 years old. The name was unheard of, so to speak. We had no brand equity in this market. And so we were literally going door to door, knocking on doors as an unknown entity, offering to provide solar systems to income qualified residents at no charge at all to the resident. No upfront cost, no back end cost. The systems would be installed on the resident's home. The residents don't own them. They're essentially a leased system. The solar developers own them so that the solar developers can take the SRECs and the investment tax credit. But the benefits from the systems in terms of a lower energy bill, you can see this young lady holding her energy bill up, are all given to the customer in the home. But to gain the customer's trust was something that was quite a challenge, particularly in the early years. You're an unknown entity. You're asking someone to see very, very specific identifying information. We had to get social security numbers. We had to get copies of bills. Their credit rating was irrelevant for the program that we were running because the customer wasn't going to be paying any money towards it, but we did have to get specific income information in terms of how much the earners in the household were making. And so this relationship became extremely difficult for us in the early years as people really didn't know about what we were doing. And I think the second presenter said, our goal in the first year was very modest. We said if the goal was 28 systems, we thought if we could install 28 systems, we would claim victory. After we started to install 2 or 3 systems, neighbors started talking to neighbors and they said, did it work? And they were like, yes, it actually works. And, did they rip you off? Did they steal your information? Did they, no, they actually came in and did what they said they were going to do. They installed the system and it's working in the bills. Then the phone started to ring. We didn't have a large marketing component, but the mouth-to-mouth sort of relationships with neighbors really allowed us to expand the program. We started with a goal of 28. We actually installed about 53 systems in that first year. By the third year we were doing it, we were installing about 140 systems a year. And so we have a long waiting list right now. And I struggle with how we're going to serve so many of the customers who are requesting access to the program at this point. But it's a good problem to have, and one that we will wrestle with and deal with in the years to come. You can go to the next slide. Another very, very interesting piece of the puzzle and where we've had to change some of our programming over the years is serving the housing stock in the District of Columbia, a large part of which is older. If you take a day like today, like the integrity of the roofs on a lot of these older houses that didn't have maintenance, the integrity of the roofs oftentimes was not very good. The electrical systems, the panel boxes needed updating. And the money that we had in the program originally and at its inception did not provide for us to be able to support repairs to the roof or to support repairs to the panel boxes and the like. I was able to go to our legislature about 5 years ago as they were lining up this new Solar for All program and said, look, if you're going to do a program that's really going to help our residents, we had to turn down so many people because either the roof wasn't structurally sound enough or the panel box couldn't receive the installation of the solar system. And so now there's an allowance of up to $3,000 that we can use for repairs in the home to actually help install the systems. If you take it here in the District of Columbia, it's been snowing all day, and And quite frankly, it's turned to rain over the last hour, and you get all of this weight on a roof, and clearly you don't want a roof that's going to collapse and then have a solar system in somebody's living room. That makes for a very unhappy customer. We've been able to work with the city, and the city's been happy to work with us to talk about, how do you upgrade these roofs? How do you upgrade some of the panel boxes? These are health and safety measures that are essential in the installation of the systems. And then, working with some of our smaller communities, homeowners associations, as they have wrestled with the conversation about installing solar. And I say this at this point, and I just want to be candid about it. When we started doing this work 8 years ago, as we do the work today, there are still people who question whether or not the technology works. I still get people who come up to me on the street today, and I'm not only in the income qualified communities, in our wealthier communities as well. They're like, does it really work? There are still people who doubt that these systems are actually providing tangible benefits, and we have been able to prove, that yes, the systems work. They work very well, and they can save a significant amount of money on residents' energy bills. You can go to the next slide. Here we have the Renewable Portfolio Expansion Act of 2016, as I've mentioned, that really jump-started and what I want to call stabilized. I shouldn't say jump-started, but it stabilized the value of our SRECs in the market here. And having stability in the marketplace, having our solar installers know that these SRECs were of value and would be of value in the years to come was a significant benefit in helping us move the market forward here in the District of Columbia. Our Clean Energy Omnibus Act of 2018, again, allowing money for roof repairs and upgrades to electrical systems. And all of this is done in a partnership. And I think wherever you're doing this, it's very important to understand. The electric utility has to be a partner. The permitting agencies in the District of Columbia have to be a partner. Often we have historical neighborhoods here in the city, and so the Historic Preservation Review Board has had to think about its policies around whether or not solar. Initially, their policy was that solar couldn't be installed in historic districts and neighborhoods where it was visible from the street. And so then, they've had to think about and reconsider their views on the installation of solar. So this is a partnership that involves several different local/state agencies as we are moving forward here in the District of Columbia. You can go to the next slide. I think I'll have about 2 more slides. An important and near and dear to my heart component of this was making sure that we brought district residents along as we were able actually to increase the number of solar installers who were coming here to the city. When the solar installers saw, when we started doing this work, there were 2 licensed solar installers here in the city. I'm proud to say today we work with almost 10. It's clearly developed a marketplace when people know you're going to be investing about $10 million a year into renewable energy. But we wanted to make sure that residents were trained for the job opportunities that would be presented through all of these new organizations starting up and installing solar. And so as a collateral sort of a program that we started to do in conjunction with the solar installations on the homes and businesses was that we were installing, we put together a program for installers, learning how to actually get up on the roofs. And it's not just the installers. The design and the permitting process up front requires people to do that. Maintenance operations on the backside requires people as well. They're office workers as well. And so we've been training in a variety of different job categories to allow our residents to make sure that they are able to capitalize on the job opportunities that have been presented here in the District of Columbia. And here's Andre Robertson here, who went through our training program last year. One of the key things, of course, is safety training. The last time I got up on a roof with one of these guys was about 3 years ago. My blood pressure got so high when I tried to get off, it was frightening. But you've got to do the safety training. You've got to do those things that really help workers through this process and make them employable. And so it's an exciting field, and quite frankly, we're finding that a lot of our residents here are gravitating towards this. They enjoy doing it. They enjoy being outdoors, not on a day like today, as I said, where it's snowing and raining, but you know, on those prettier days here in the District of Columbia, and our climate here is normally pretty good. It's a lot of people are really enjoying doing this work, and we've expanded the solar workforce tremendously as we've had this training program going on now for the better part of about 5 years. You can go to the next slide. And then again, Solar for All is a program today which is installing about 120 sets of solar panels on single family homes and doing roughly 7 megawatts of community solar a year. And 7 megawatts here in the District of Columbia helps about 2,000 households a year reduce their electric energy burden by about 50%. So if you look at the two programs combined, we're on average helping about 21 to 2,200 households a year reduce their energy burden for the next 20 years by about 50%. And so we're very, very proud. Here are some of the team members who work on our staff who are helping with the installations. The gentleman on the far right is our lead engineer. Two of the ladies that you can see in the center are members of our solar team who are doing community outreach for us. You can see a number of the installers with their harnesses on in the back. We're really, really proud of this team. They just do incredible work here in the city, and I can't brag about them enough. In fact, you can go on to I think this is the final slide where we talk about what we've been able to do here in the city over the years. Over $39 million invested in renewable energy programs in low-income communities, really, really with a huge return on the dollar. 4,000 or so low to moderate income residents with energy bills, helped them just in the last 2 years alone as we started doing community solar about 2 years ago. This number in the middle, over 600 jobs created for district residents, really helping citizens here get a job, get a career, becoming tax-paying residents here in the District of Columbia is very, very important to our legislature. Our unemployment rate in certain parts of the city is still over 20%. And so anything that organizations can do to help residents get training, get jobs, get careers is extremely valued here in the District of Columbia. And this last figure over on the right, well, not the last, the one on the top right, should say over 700 now solar systems installed on single family homes with over 13 megawatts of solar installed, roughly in this 13 megawatts is community solar in the last 2 years. We're a small city, only 63 square miles. And we're not an area that has an abundance of land where you can install these community solar systems out in open land or something like this. So it's all on rooftops, and now we're doing parking canopies as an additional way. We're installing solar over parking lots. We installed solar on the side of the Audi field, which is where our professional soccer team plays. We're looking for creative and innovative spaces here in the District of Columbia because we don't have a lot of land. But we feel that this is a program that's been going now, going strong, and I would say that the investment of about $10 million a year for 2 years now, and has a lot of upside to it. And so we thank you again for the opportunity to present today, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Okay, thank you very much. Catherine, let's go to the next slide, please. And thank you so much for your participation, Ted. There's Ted's contact information on the previous slide. And now we're ready for discussion.
And I'm sorry about the background, because my son is in jazz class right now.
All right.
If I hope you can't hear it, but maybe you can.
We hardly notice.
Okay.
So Tom, I think it might be good to kick off the discussion with the whole team with this question. Is the rooftop model higher in benefit to the LMI customer or the community solar model? Which is better? What are the pros and cons? And Ted, can I call you later about my condo complex to see if we can install some solar here? We're at
Absolutely. I think my phone number was on there.
So,
Ted, do you want to take a shot at that question first?
Sure.
You know, what's better, rooftop or community?
Absolutely. It depends on the size of the roof. We install systems on single family homes that are up to 5 kW in size. We try not to exceed that size, just for fairness. I mean, sometimes you could put more than that on the roof, but we try not to exceed. We try to. The systems are between 3.5 and 5 kW. Now, conversely, what are you doing inside of the home? How energy efficient is the home, or inefficient in the first place? And so all of those factors are considerations in terms of the amount of your energy bill that will be reduced. When we're doing community solar, on the other hand, your energy bill, you will get a credit on your energy bill for a standard amount of money. So you are a subscriber to a large system, and you will get a specific amount of money. And so the question is a great one, but the answer is kind of nebulous, and really it depends, you know.
Jenny, do you have any insight into this?
Yeah, I mean, I would echo that, and I think it is very state and utility specific in terms of the exact, financial benefits that might go to an LMI person who is putting solar on their roof or subscribing to community solar. I also would just say, our low income community solar subscribers, they're often in multifamily affordable housing facilities, or they rent, so they just don't have the option to do on-site solar. So I don't think it's a question of which one is best and we're only going to do one. It's we need all of these solutions for different types of housing stock and ownership structures.
I agree that we're going to need multifaceted programs. I guess my observation would be there have been very successful programs, typically called Solarize, where they'll get groups of households to come together to all purchase similar rooftop systems, and that can bring the price of those systems way down. Yeah. And then with community solar, you're building a bigger array and sometimes can get good economies of scale in the construction and engineering, and that can bring the price down. So either way is a potential pathway to success.
Yeah, this is Galen. I'll echo all of that. I think, from my perspective, the biggest differentiator is just, that community solar allows access to customers that really just don't have an ability to participate in the rooftop market, along the lines of what Jenny said. That being said, one, I suppose, sort of unique feature of rooftop solar, at least if the customer owns it, is that it does provide an opportunity for that household to build wealth. They own the system, it's their asset. They're not just leasing it or providing some subscription fee for an annual benefit. And that sort of, that the ability to sort of build wealth within low income communities is, I think, also an important objective, and is something that in some cases rooftop systems can provide.
Yeah, it's true. We had a recipient of solar, and a lot of times when we go in and do solar, we also try to follow it up with energy efficiency within the home. I mean, that's critical as well, so that you can combine the two together. And one of the recipients said, this has been life-changing for me. She said, I used to get around in my BMW. She said, bike, metro, or walk. She said, now for the first time, she said, I've reduced my energy bill so much she was actually able to go out and buy a used car. It was the first car she'd ever owned. And she could take her son to school. She could go and get her groceries in the car. And she said it was life-changing for her. And not that a car is wealth building, but I think it is an important. Now, if you are in a home and you own the system, and then you can take the value of the aspects, particularly in an area like this, that is a a stream of revenue. There's no doubt about it, that can become very lucrative over time.
So Ted, there's another question here to follow up with you. You talked about the roof repair and the things that were necessary with the older housing stock, particularly in cities like DC. Who does the repairs, and where does the funding come from? How are these things funded?
Sure. For the first part of the question about who does the repairs, normally the solar installers will have a roofing contractor and an electrical contractor who are partners with them. So those companies will go, and complete any roof repairs and things that are necessary on the electrical side. I should say, an added challenge here in the District of Columbia, because if any of you on the phone or on this conference today live here, or those of you who have visited, this is an urban forest. We have a lot of trees here. We are not allowed, I want to make it very clear, we are not allowed to cut trees in order to give access to the roof for solar. So that's something that we don't do. So you have a number of roofs that might be otherwise suitable, but there's too much shade, so we can't serve them. But on the other side of the house, the financing, as I said, comes from the Renewable Energy Development Fund, which is the fine on the energy suppliers for failing to meet their renewable energy portfolio standards. That's the revenue that's used, and we don't receive all of that money every year. Some of that money goes to the city to fund other sorts of programs. The government itself tries to run some programs locally to put solar on government buildings, and so they do that themselves. But we take probably 75% of that to do the income qualified solar programs, as I said, both for community solar and for single family.
So here is a question, Jenny, for you. Do any of the alternative LMI subscription mechanisms provide an average discount on electric energy of 20% or more?
So we have seen some offers for LMI customers that are more than 20% or 20%. So in some states, we see the fixed discount approach for all customers. Typically those are around 10 to 20% fixed discount for any customer. Those are in our major markets like Massachusetts. We've also seen some offers, for example, in Colorado, the energy office here provided grant funding to some utilities. Those utilities targeted, I think, 30% to 50% savings for subscribers, for their LMI subscribers to those projects. So yeah, we definitely have examples of that. I would say it's not the norm. I would say usually we see savings around 10 to 20%.
Okay, thank you so much, everyone. And we really appreciated your participation today. We're going to wind up now. We're running out of time. Let's go to the next slide. And we'll just show you a couple slides that talk about upcoming events in our calendar. So we have a webinar coming up in February 3rd, on how policy goals are intersecting with or interacting with resource adequacy needs. Particularly, that'll focus a little bit on California and the recent experiences with California ISO. And one more slide lists upcoming initiative training courses from what we call RTI, Regulatory Training Initiative. A big introduction to accounting class 3 days in a row in January, and introduction to utility finance 3 days in a row in February, as you see on the calendar there. Everyone who joined us today, thank you for your participation, and we certainly invite you all to go visit the National Community Solar Partnership platform that Jenny was talking about. We did receive some questions today that were really quite technical, and we'll try to open up some discussion of those on that National Community Solar Partnership website. And we appreciate your attention today and all of the interest in trying to make sure that we have equitable programs and really good programs that can help serve all customers. So again, thank you for your participation, and we appreciate the presentations. Bye.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.